Hey guys, in this video the brilliant team is going to be going over the bits that you need for your AQA GCSE history option on Elizabethan England. While you're watching this video you can use the checklist and then identify any gaps you've got in your knowledge, and then you can use the multiple choice questions and the workbooks to go through and fill in those gaps.
Elizabeth I lived from 1533 to 1603, dying aged 69. She reigned from 1558 to 1603 and was succeeded by James I. James I was James I of England, but James VI of Scotland. Elizabeth assumed the throne when she was 25 years old and underwent her coronation shortly after taking the throne. She was and is thought of as a competent and careful ruler, appointing good ministers and ruling wisely both at home and in foreign affairs. Elizabeth defined an era, the Elizabethan age, in a way which many monarchs have failed to do. Under Elizabeth I, England was an absolute monarchy, whereas today it is a constitutional monarchy. The monarch was dominant in all affairs of national government. Parliament had a very limited role, consisting of an upper House of Lords and an elected House of Commons, similar to today. Parliament was, however, called at the request of the Queen, who could veto any and all acts of Parliament, which she regularly did. Matters were mostly decided by the Queen and the Privy Council. Government happened through the court, which moved around different palaces in the south of England. Local government in the Elizabethan age was fractured and complicated. Royal representatives were appointed in every county, and it's worth remembering that counties then do not precisely line up with counties today. The government of the time appointed justices of the peace to prevent and punish crimes, in a similar way to act as early judges. Sheriffs were there to act as an early police force. Lords Lieutenant were appointed by the royals to organise and maintain a militia. Much of local government was drawn from the nobles and landed gentry. Regional councils, such as the Council of the North, ruled over regions far from London. Regions far from London would also be far from royal control, so it was important for the monarch to appoint trusted representatives to ensure the loyalty of those areas. Each city and town had its own small government, generally plus a mayor. The court was the centre of royal power. It consisted of the senior nobles and landed gentry. The patronage system was used to maintain discipline and authority. The patronage system was the handing out of jobs and titles by the monarch. These ranged from minor jobs, such as executioner, up to very major jobs, such as places on the Privy Council. The court was not set in one place, it was not a physical location. The court was a group of people who met wherever the Queen was and followed her from residence to residence. Elizabeth, like her father, Henry VIII, was very fond of having a number of palaces around London and the southeast of England, from which she would move from time to time. Elizabeth used patronage in the court system very wisely to ensure the obedience and loyalty of the senior nobles, of the clergy of the Church of England, and of the landed gentry. The Privy Council, which many like to think of as an Elizabethan cabinet, was a senior group of ministers appointed by Elizabeth in her capacity as monarch. They would give a range of opinions on important issues of the day, carry out routine administration in a similar way to cabinet ministers today, and would meet between 3 and 7 times weekly. As Elizabeth's reign continued, the Privy Council met more and more. At the start of her reign, they would generally meet only 3 times a week. However, by the end of her reign, they were meeting daily. They were led by a Secretary of State, almost a deputy for the monarch, who would stand in and make decisions if the monarch was unable to attend. Privy Councillor is a title still in use today, but the Privy Council, as we say, generally resembles the cabinet of today's British government. Privy Councillor today is a more honorific title which doesn't carry formal responsibilities, but is handed out to senior politicians, both in government and in opposition. Bess of Hardwick was an important figure during the Elizabethan age. She was born in 1527, slightly before Elizabeth, and she died in 1608, slightly after Elizabeth. She married the Earl of Shrewsbury, who was keeper of Mary Queen of Scots, who at the time was imprisoned in the Earl of Shrewsbury's country house. The Hardwicks were instructed by Elizabeth to keep Mary under house arrest, and this caused the marriage between Bess of Hardwick and the Earl of Shrewsbury to break down following the persistent interference by Mary. To be given the job of jailer to an extremely powerful monarch was a difficult job for anyone, and it essentially involved maintaining a small, hostile government within one's own house. William Cecil, also known as Lord Burghley, was another extremely important figure in the Elizabethan age. For almost all of Elizabeth's reign, William Cecil was either Secretary of State, the most senior minister on the Privy Council, or Lord Treasurer. His main goal, similar to that of Elizabeth, was the creation of a unified and Protestant British Isles. William Cecil effectively acted as Elizabeth's Prime Minister. He was responsible for the widespread persecution of Catholics and was eventually responsible for the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Cecil was economically cautious, and he constantly acted in the interests of the state and the Queen. Often, these two interests coalesced into one. Eventually, Elizabeth raised William Cecil to become Lord Burghley. Robert Dudley, the first Earl of Leicester, was a critical statesman, but also a potential suitor to Elizabeth for the first 30 years of Elizabeth's reign. He was a key military officer during important affairs, such as the Dutch Revolt and later the Spanish Armada. He was a supporter of Puritanism, then a widespread but slightly maligned Protestant sect, and other nonconformist areas of the clergy. Robert Dudley was a key patron of the arts and literature and theatre. He was also a potential husband to Mary, Queen of Scots, on the suggestion of Elizabeth after Elizabeth decided not to marry him. There are a number of potential reasons for this. One is that Mary, Queen of Scots, would be seen as a potential second place for Robert Dudley. The other is to neutralise the influence of Mary, Queen of Scots by marrying her off to somebody so close to Elizabeth. Historians are divided upon which of these is true. Francis Walsingham was the principal secretary to the Queen for the majority of her reign. He acted as her master spymaster and secret policeman. He was a committed Protestant and a vehement anti-Catholic, disrupting a range of plots against Elizabeth throughout her reign. He secured and organised the carrying out of the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, and used a network of spies to learn of and plan for the Spanish Armada. Walsingham's spies were not confined to Britain, and it's widely believed they had spies in a range of European countries, which he used in the protection of British interests and in the interests of Elizabeth I. It was widely expected that Elizabeth would marry and produce children upon taking the throne. She considered several possibilities, known as suitors, up to the age of 50. Robert Dudley, we have already mentioned, who was a senior courtier, but was himself married until 1560. Francis, Duke of Anjou, was a French prince, tied to a wish of Elizabeth's to prevent Spanish control of the Netherlands. Archduke Charles of Austria was cousin to Philip I of Spain and would head off Spanish rivalry and possible invasion in the future. But by 1570, it was accepted that Elizabeth would not marry after she had turned down all of these suitors, and she was encouraged to nominate an heir to ease the succession when she did eventually die. She did, however, refuse to do this. Eventually, senior figures around Elizabeth came to the conclusion that the best option would be James VI of Scotland, who would become James I of England, and a smooth transition to him was organised upon Elizabeth's death. Sent to Ireland in 1599 to try and secure victory over the Irish, a problem that had bedeviled British monarchs for several hundred years. Essex, however, fought a series of inconclusive skirmishes, small battles, and eventually signed a treaty with the Irish. The treaty was, at home in England, widely seen as a disgrace. Essex was maligned and imprisoned. As a result, Essex's house became a focal point for those disillusioned with Elizabeth and her rule. Their goal was to force the Queen to get rid of Lord Cecil, and Essex planned to surprise the court during a theatre performance, but this failed. Essex then tried to raise the city of London, or its population, in rebellion against Elizabeth. Messengers from the Queen were detained. However, Robert Cecil sent warnings to the mayor. Hearing of this, most of Essex's followers deserted him and ran away, and the rebellion ended. Essex was arrested, given the customary show trial, in which the outcome is predetermined, and then executed. Many minor members of the conspiracy were fined, but for Elizabeth this was troubling, as this was the first major rebellion against her rule. At this point she did not realise that many others would come, but this was the first hint of discontent in the country widely against her rule. Elizabethan society was rigidly hierarchical and unequal. There was little possibility for those at the bottom to progress or advance. The monarch, of course, was at the very top of society. Below her came nobles, the aristocracy, royal retainers. This included many senior figures of the Church of England. Craftsmen, professionals, and skilled workers tended to be in the middle, with peasants and farmers and beggars at the bottom. Elizabethan society was not just rigidly hierarchical, but that rigidity was displayed. There were even laws known as sumptuary laws, which governed what each class of person could wear. For example, only those of noble rank or above could wear purple, as it was seen as a noble or royal colour. The concept of the Great Chain was a religious concept leading to a theocratic structure of society. Those who believed in the Great Chain believed that all of creation was a single chain, leading from God at the very top, down through the monarch, senior nobles, the other remnants of humanity, other animals, plants with minerals and rocks at the bottom. While not an appealing concept to us today, to those who believed in Elizabethan Christianity, this created a single unifying concept. Chain theory could be used by those in power in several ways. It could be used to justify this huge and persistent inequality as God's will, as the natural order of things as set down by God. It could also be used to justify the status quo and the political system at the time. It was only natural that in the concept of the great chain, the monarch, who was above everybody else and below only God, would be ruling. There were many causes of wealth and poverty in Elizabethan society. Causes of wealth included the increasing international trade and exploration, increasing industrialization and urbanization. Britain was very gradually moving from an agricultural rural society to one more based in cities and towns, and the beginnings of an industrial revolution were even now starting to happen. Many more people were involved in a middle professional class, either as skilled craftsmen or as professionals like doctors or lawyers. Poverty was caused by a complete lack of any kind of welfare state whatsoever. There was very limited pensions and retirement provision. Most people worked long into elderly years. Disease was rampant and little understood, and education was very limited. Children would leave school at a very young age, usually under 10, and then would go directly into work. This caused rampant poverty. There was huge inequality between the emerging wealth of the middle and upper classes based on this international trade and exploration and skilled labour, and the poverty of the general masses, who lacked any kind of support or welfare state and any kind of opportunity to progress. Vagabondage was the condition of being unemployed and homeless, and usually therefore an itinerant or travelling beggar, who would move from village to village attempting to beg a basic living. There were many Elizabethan solutions to the poverty problem, which differ markedly from solutions today. Many communities would attempt to move beggars on, or make it illegal for them to remain in the village or parish. The military would quite often forcibly conscript beggars into usually the navy. There would be forced employment for food and lodgings in return, in a way which has echoes down history in the workhouse system of the Victorian age. Church alms boxes attempted to give, through donations made to the church, a very basic level of financial support and safety net. One word which we have which comes from this is Boxing Day. On Boxing Day, traditionally, church alms boxes would be opened and the money therein distributed to the local poor and vagabonds. The Elizabethan era is widely considered to be a golden age of theatre. Numerous revered authors worked during this time, some of whom you may have seen in your studies of English literature, such as William Shakespeare, Beckett, and Marlowe. Unlike today, where not that many people visit the theatre, especially on a very regular basis, theatre in the Elizabethan age was both widespread among all classes and very common. Many people would visit the theatre several times a week or almost daily. Plays were performed both in physical theatres and also by roving troupes of actors who would make their way around the country, performing plays in villages and towns in return for money. The Globe Theatre was built specifically for the plays and the theatre company of Shakespeare in Shakespeare's latter career. Many plays of Shakespeare that are common today were performed for the first time in the Globe Theatre, and it was specifically built around his plays and plots. The Elizabethan age is widely regarded as a golden age of sea travel and exploration. However, sea voyages during these times were both long and perilous. Many sea voyages, especially to other far-flung continents such as South or North America, can be thought of at the best in months. There were many risks, and these included privateers, who were private seamen, who often would make a living by robbing or by taking over ships. The popular culture of pirates has grown from these. Disease, especially scurvy caused by a lack of vitamin C, and other waterborne diseases such as cholera were a persistent problem. As the mechanics of the sea itself was not well understood, shipwrecks, ships sinking, causing the death of all those aboard, were a common and feared problem too. There were two notable characters during this era. Sir Walter Raleigh made voyages to South America. He discovered new lands, but published a very embellished account of his voyages. The legend of El Dorado, the City of Gold, stems from Sir Walter Raleigh's travels. Francis Drake circumnavigated the world. In doing so, he discovered a huge range of new lands, new peoples, and plants and animals. This tradition of exploration would eventually lead into the British Empire, and through the Elizabethan era and then after, the British would be at the forefront of worldwide exploration. Catholicism was the dominant Christian religion of the era. Roman Catholicism was run from the Vatican City inside Rome by the Pope, known as the papacy. Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, had separated England from the Catholic Church. He did this in order to make a divorce he had planned allowable. This created the Church of England, one of a number of Protestant churches. Elizabeth was well aware that many Catholics wished to see her removed in favour of a Catholic monarch. Throughout most of her reign, this was Mary, Queen of Scots. She therefore considered many Catholics to be disloyal to the crown, and wherever possible, she took steps to stamp out and remove Catholicism from England. Elizabeth's goal in this was a completely Protestant society. However, many Catholics refused to convert. Some did, but those that did not were known as recusant Catholics and were persecuted. Generally, they had to carry out Catholic services in secret. There were several rebellions against Elizabeth through her reign, and all of these, in general, had the goal of installing a Catholic monarch instead of Elizabeth on the throne. The usual candidate for this, through most of Elizabeth's reign, was Mary, Queen of Scots. However, after Mary, Queen of Scots was executed by Elizabeth, the preferred candidate became either Philip of Spain or potentially James of Scotland. The Ridolfi plot involved a banker known as Ridolfi, who, due to his profession, was able to travel among countries, uniting and therefore being able to communicate with conspirators. The Northern Rebellion was a failed rebellion of northern noblemen. They had the aim eventually of deposing Elizabeth and removing her in favour of Mary, Queen of Scots. Eventually, to end the plotting, Elizabeth imprisoned and then executed Mary, Queen of Scots. Her idea in doing this was that removing the potential rival to the throne would deprive the many conspirators against her of a figurehead to rally around and try and install instead of Elizabeth. The relationship between England and Spain and their monarchs, Elizabeth I and Philip II, throughout the era of Elizabeth's rule was a complex one. Spain was a major rival to England throughout the Elizabethan age. Like England, Spain was a predominantly naval power, focused on exploration and trade. Unlike England, Spain was gradually building up expertise in exploration and colonisation, heading, therefore, towards making an empire. Philip II of Spain had a reasonable claim to the English throne. He was therefore, for many of the conspirators against Elizabeth, a potential Catholic rival for the throne. Eventually, after much rivalry over various European conflicts, including the Dutch Revolt, Philip II decided to directly challenge Elizabeth with the Spanish Armada. There were actually several Spanish armadas, most of which failed due to either poor planning, the technical disadvantages that the Spanish suffered, their technology was quite a long way behind naval technology in England at the time, or pure bad luck in the form usually of bad weather. The patch of sea between the Bay of Biscay and southern England is still littered today with the remnants of the many ships that were sent by the Spanish and Philip II to try and conquer England. All of these failed. This failure of Spain to conquer England through the Spanish Armada led to an increase in the fortunes of Elizabeth. She was already regarded as a wise ruler at home, but this cemented her reputation both then and after as a wise ruler in foreign and military affairs.
Ouch. Love you too, Crim.